Jedd Fisch and Washington have a lot to learn from this loss to Michigan.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. That gentleman right there, that is Jake Butt, former All-American tight end and commentator with the Big Ten Network, who will be on the call for Washington's game this weekend, and a Michigan alum. So getting his insight on this is going to be tremendous. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Now, we got a really fun show coming at all you everydayers out there because, like I said, Washington has so much that it can learn from this game against Michigan. We'll talk about how the Huskies might be able to put that into effect this coming week against Illinois. We'll talk about Washington's struggles against tight ends and on the defensive side of the ball, because we have someone who is certainly very uniquely suited to talk about some of that sort of stuff. But Jake, when you look at this loss to Michigan, your alma mater, what was the number one thing that stood out to you?
Well, the overarching theme was, so let's just, when you were preparing for this game and talking to your audience, you were looking at Michigan's performance against USC, right?
Yes.
I was listening to your podcast yesterday with Lars, and I just started laughing a little bit because I was like, you guys sound exactly how Michigan fans sounded the Sunday and Monday after that game. It was for Michigan going on the road to USC. It was like, man, this is such an important game for Michigan. Like, they're looking good. If you beat Lincoln Riley on the road, all of a sudden Michigan's, deeply in the playoff hunt, and right. Michigan goes across country. It's the travel, and they lay an absolute egg. They were out-coached. They didn't tackle well. Nothing worked offensively. And all of a sudden you're talking about it. I'm talking about my podcast. I'm like, wow, that game was inexcusable. The season's over for Michigan. This stinks. And then Michigan comes back against Washington at home and corrects it all. That's right. How I felt. I'm like, man, Washington, you guys look just like Michigan did on the road. There's something to it. It's no excuse, but clearly there's a trend of like these time zone road travel games. Like, it's affecting teams. It's absolutely affecting teams. And, frankly, I just look at that game and I say that was Michigan. That was Michigan's best day. And Washington just happened to be the opponent next on the schedule after Michigan really had their manhood checked basically by local media and national media. And they went out there against the Huskies with something to prove. That's how I feel. The Huskies caught sleeping, slow start, was not their best game. You're facing Michigan on their best day. And that's really the summary here. Is I just think Michigan was the better team, and you saw the talent discrepancy that showed up a little bit. I do not feel like it's time to panic for the Huskies. It was a bad game. You got to own that, Jedd. You got to sit up there as a leader and say, hey, that's on me as a coach. Demond, you didn't play good enough. Everyone got to say didn't play good enough. But no time to hit the panic button. It was just a sum of a lot of negative circumstances that added up to that result.
So I'm glad you mentioned all that, because that was one thing I talked about a lot last week leading up to this game. Was one thing that we're really going to, no matter what happens, we are going to look back on this game and say Washington needs to continue to recruit better in the trenches. That is something that I know this coaching staff has emphasized, and they're doing a good job of that so far on the trail, between the 26 class and some of the guys they're in on early in 2027, because that's where this really showed up. Washington finished this game after, sack adjusted and everything with 40 rushing yards. You mentioned before the show. That's the fewest they've had in a game in two years. Somewhere in that ballpark. And it's one of those things where I've seen a lot of people, and it's something I talked about a little bit, where Demond Williams had 3 design runs plus 2 sacks as his 5 carries. Jonah Coleman had 50 yards on the ground. He was able to get in the end zone, but there just wasn't a lot going in this game on the ground. And part of that, I'm sure you can chalk up to Washington not having Carver Willis, not having John Mills. But Michigan also just was an overwhelming force in the front 7.
Mm-hmm. No, it's in another key stat is Washington didn't have a single run that went for over 8 yards. So everything felt difficult. Like literally just you can tell a lot about just how you feel when watching a game. And for I'm sure all of you guys that are Husky fans sitting at home, you're like, man, everything feels difficult. It's like you're climbing up Mount Everest with no oxygen. And yes, the trench play, that was the glaring difference in this game. And there's no more helpless feeling than when your opponent is effortlessly able to break off 4, 5, 8, 9, and occasionally 20+ yard runs, when they're just getting chunk runs on you. And then when you call your runs with an athletic quarterback and a great running back, and it feels like there's no space and there's nowhere to go with the football, that all of a sudden what that ends up showing up as is Michigan is in 3rd and 1 or 3rd and 2 or avoiding 3rd down altogether because they're just handing the ball off. Meanwhile, Washington is in 2nd and long, therefore 3rd and long, and just being, just adding up to be a really frustrating day. And for the Husky defense, I thought this stat was really telling. Michigan's final 4 possessions, they didn't force a single turnover or a punt. So then all of a sudden, Michigan is just holding the ball and completely dictating the terms of play. That's the big difference, between the elite teams, the great teams, the good teams, and the average teams, is you could point directly to the trenches on both sides of the ball. If you can dictate the terms of play, if you could dominate the line of scrimmage, you're going to win a lot of games.
And especially along the offensive line, that's something where we've seen Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff do a good job in investing in putting a better protection unit around Damon Williams. But this is, and I feel like it's no secret here, it was the worst day of his young career so far. He's made 9 starts, and I don't think we've seen him struggle like this. Was there anything that stood out to you? Because for me, I look at especially the stick route where he threw the interception that was behind Decker DeGraff. It felt like there was a certain point, in my opinion at least, where he just kind of started rushing and started trying to speed things up a little bit too much in his head, especially with, the pressure that was starting to get there, where I think he was pressured on more than 50% of his dropbacks in the second half. There were a lot of things that just really stood out as these are all learning experiences. And one thing that I like that Jedd Fisch said after the game that I mentioned on the Monday show is he said, I didn't prepare him well enough for this game.
Yeah, I think so. So Damon had 15 dropbacks in the second half. He was pressured on 9 of them. So again, that goes back to the trenches. And again, I think you can just observe, just focus, go back and watch that game and just observe how you feel if you're just watching Damon in the pocket. He never looked settled. It never looked like he just was able to breathe and get settled into the game. I mean, some of those explosive plays, those were great plays. Very challenging though on a number of those plays. It wasn't easy outside of maybe, I don't know, 1 or 2 plays, if that. Your quarterback can never get settled in. And I can't help but think well, first off, I'll say this. He hasn't even got to his 10th start.
Right.
Let's not forget here. This guy is basically still a freshman. There is a steep learning curve. It is not linear, even though he's talented and he's so good, it almost makes you feel like he can do it. He could be Superman, but no one is. It's not linear. It's not even his 10th start. But I go back to the Maryland game, and I was really shocked in that game because he never looked settled against Maryland. And I'm starting to think a little bit, that Ohio State loss, up until that point, Damon had been extremely efficient, makes so few mistakes, takes care of the football, obviously just a complete playmaker. And then all of a sudden there's these big storylines of, hey, Damon, you have to know when to throw it away. You have to know when it's appropriate to take a sack versus not taking a sack. And all of a sudden, though, what you're basically doing, your young quarterback is now thinking. He's thinking a lot about what is being said to him rather than just going out there and playing free. And there's a little give and a take here because, hey, you got to think a little bit to improve. But that's, to me, what's showing up a little bit is I'm seeing a guy in Damon Williams that is just an unbelievable playmaker, but he's playing slower and processing slower because he's thinking. Therefore, he never gets settled in. Therefore, the offense just doesn't work. I mean, that's just the truth of this roster and this team right now. Like, for Washington to reach their full potential, they need Damon to play like a top 5 quarterback in the Big Ten at a minimum every single week.
And speaking of the offense, that wasn't working on Saturday, but the defense wasn't either. So let's talk a little bit about Washington's struggles against the tight end position. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at Monarch. Let's be honest, most of us can't even name all our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth. Between 401ks, savings, and investments, it's easy to lose track, and that can mean leaving money on the table. That's why I started using Monarch, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. It's helped me organize my accounts, track my spending, and just get a better handle on my investments as a whole without ever having to touch a spreadsheet. Monarch's visual dashboards and smart tools make it so much easier to understand where my money's going and how to make it work harder for me. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarch.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarch.com, code LOCKDOWNCollege for half off your first year. We also got a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love how FanDuel gives me so many ways to play. I built parlays, tried player props, and even followed the live lines during games. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. So, Jake, as we flip sides of the ball here, we have it's always wonderful when we have you on. You've been such tremendous insight, and there's no better insight that you give than at the tight end position, what you played in college and in the NFL. And one thing that my good buddy Alex Katzen writes to me over at Huskies Wire pointed out is coming into this game against Michigan, Washington had given up 386 passing yards to tight ends, which is the most in the Big Ten, one of the worst in the FBS. And then without Michigan's top 2 tight ends, they still went out and had a tremendous day. Was there anything in particular that you saw that either Michigan did to try to exploit what Ryan Walters had going on, things Washington struggled with, a little bit of both maybe?
Yeah, first off, I thought, Chip Lindsey called his best. That was the best game that he has called all season long. That's Michigan's offensive coordinator and play caller for the viewers at home. And, it'd been a up and down and frustrating season in terms of, the play calling for Michigan. But unfortunately, again, for the Huskies, Michigan coming off a really frustrating loss against USC, and that coaching staff was dialed in, and they had their players dialed in. And it all starts with Chip as a play caller. I felt he did a great job of messing with the eyes of the linebackers and the safeties of Washington. And I think of Ryan Walters, like when Ryan Walters is a defensive coordinator, he wants his defense to be attacking, at least back at Illinois, like they want to at least on a number of occasions, they want the defense to be the one pushing the tempo and force the offense to be on their heels. I never felt like Michigan was on their heels this entire game. I felt like Michigan was consistently a step ahead mentally of the Washington defense. It's not just your ability, and I'll tie this back into tight ends, I promise. It's not just your ability to run the ball, but it's how you run the ball, and it's how you utilize motions and shifts to run the ball, and again, to mess with the eyes of the linebackers. I thought they did a good job of sprinkling in jet sweeps, dummy jet sweeps, wide receiver little reverses, great screen game, and then all of a sudden, the linebackers completely lost in coverage, because then you can get into play action and Michigan's tight ends were running free on a number of occasions, running free. And then on a number of occasions, they just won on their route. And because Bryce was playing so confident, he was able to just put the ball on the money, and the tight ends made plays. But it's the stuff that really frustrates you as a Husky fan is the time where it looks like complete blown coverage. And that to me is just a culmination of the play calling, the sequencing by Chip Lindsey, the game plan in general, and then Michigan's ability to execute running the ball, because then the play action and RPOs really start to work.
So you just bring up such a tremendous example there, because the touchdown to Zach Marshall is, I think, one where, especially if you don't have access to the L22 or different things, all you see is just a tight end running free in the back corner of the end zone with Bryce Underwood rolling out to his right. And he's got two options, a short and then the intermediate, which obviously he takes for the touchdown, because it felt like, and you said it perfectly, Washington's linebackers and Washington's safeties just were a step behind for a lot of this game. And I think one of the biggest things that this comes back to, in a sense, is not being able to stop the run and the battle in the trenches that we were talking about in the opener as well, because Washington's pass rush just didn't find a way to hit home on Bryce Underwood throughout this game. And there were a couple of missed opportunities. I know Taitaui got credit for a sack when he pushed him out of bounds in the third quarter, I want to say it was. Yeah. There were a couple opportunities where it felt like you could have wrapped him up and weren't able to do that, but the pass rush just has not been consistent. It was nice that the Huskies got Zach Durfee back for this game, but there just hasn't been any of that consistency, especially along the interior, which is where, especially with what has been a deep group of interior pass rushers, they just haven't hit home at any kind of rate.
And Walters defensively, I mean, he's not at Illinois. He sat in that 5-man front like that. He was playing that all season long. And I know you guys run a lot of four down front as well, so it's not quite the same. But philosophically, in Walters' defense, they place a premium on the ability to be disruptive and win one-on-one matchups on the interior of the defensive line, and that didn't happen at all. But again, I go back to Chip Lindsey, because the creativity in the screen game, the timing and feel as a play caller to know when to go to the screens was outstanding. It's not just like, if it's 3rd and 20, it's like, duh, expect a screen. But it was, I don't know. I just felt, again, like Chip called his best game, and it felt like Ryan Walters was just never able to get a sense of what's coming next from Michigan. So that's when when your defensive coordinators presenting like that, that's where you get your defensive line they're kind of just like guessing themselves. And unfortunately, they never guessed right. So it really all came together for Michigan. And again, like Bryce Underwood, it's very similar with Damon. Like, these are two young quarterbacks, and they're two talented quarterbacks. And when you inject confidence into these young, talented quarterbacks, it becomes really scary for the opponent. Bryce was just letting it rip in that game with confidence. And if that's what it's going to look like, I think Michigan's a playoff team and could end up beating anyone, including Ohio State, in late November.
So I love where you're going with that, because I think the most confident throw that he made all day is one that is something that just still stings with Husky fans, because there have been several times this year, as you saw when you were calling the UW Maryland game, Washington has had trouble getting off the field on 3rd and long at various points this year. And some of that does have to, give credit to the opposing quarterbacks when they're making these really tough throws. I think about the 3rd and 11 to Deacon Tonielli. That was 27, 28 yards, somewhere in that ballpark, where that was a really nice throw, and you have to give him credit there. But it's something that, especially, on the UW side of things, people are going to look at that play and just say, what happened? Why aren't you able to get off the field on a play like that? And it feels like, just, I've said this several times over the course of the last few days now, there were several plays in this game that were just kind of a microcosm of all the things that were going wrong for the Huskies in Ann Arbor. And I feel like that was one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you, this is exactly what I was saying on my Michigan podcast against USC. It's just like so unbelievable. And it's also like the context. I know there's a lot of pain for the Huskies, because that was an important game. Absolutely. You win that game, and then you're hosting Illinois, and the Huskies don't lose at home. And then you look at that stretch on the schedule before hosting Oregon, and you're like, oh my God, we might be a playoff team. Like, right. And as soon as you have that thought, you set yourself up for disappointment. And that's, effectively, just what happened, and it doesn't, like, it's a good observation of like these certain small things are a microcosm of the day as a whole. But again, it just goes back to just the big theme of Michigan's coaches had their team ready to play. Michigan's coordinators had a game plan that was built for absolute success. The players were played with a chip on their shoulder and believed in the game plan. Therefore, they were playing fast and with confidence. And the flip side is the truth for Washington. They were not ready to play. They were not emotionally ready to play. They started slow, and there was just never adjustments to steal some of that momentum back. And I believe like Ryan Walters tried, and I believe Jedd tried. It just, again, like Michigan had answers for everything that Washington was trying to present on Saturday.
So let's talk about that Illinois game a little bit and how Washington can fix some things this weekend, starting with Damon Williams on the ground. Right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. College football is back, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real, actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. I pulled up Game Time, and in just a couple taps, I saw amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite college football games for as low as $25. The app also makes it super simple. You can even see the exact view from your seat before buying. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. So Jake, one thing that I know I've had my gripes about, and I've seen a lot of it from Washington fans, is Damon Williams is coming off a career performance against Rutgers. 402 yards to the air, 136 yards on the ground, and, won every award possible for a quarterback. It seemed like Big Ten Offensive Player of the Week, Maxwell Award, and so on and so forth. And Jedd Fisch comes into this game against Michigan, and I feel like I have to give a lot of credit to Michigan's defense and just the athletes they have in the front seven. And Damon Williams only has 3 designed carries in this game. Mm-hmm. How much of that is credit to Jedd Fisch has to find different ways to succeed on a week in, week out basis, just in terms of what the opponents are bringing to the table? And how much of that is just kind of Michigan specific to what they were doing to attack Damon?
Well, I think Michigan did a great job. They had a great game plan. And Jedd and Damon and Jimmy D and everybody's going to have to come up with an answer, because that's the formula. What Michigan did is when Washington gets into those read option carries, it's all predicated on the defensive look. Damon's right. Reading it, and whatever look the defense presents is, that's where he gives it to Jonah or keeps it. And Michigan clearly had the game plan to say, we're going to force Damon to give the ball to Jonah, and we're going to win with our big interior defensive linemen, so there'll be no space there at the line of scrimmage, and then we're going to rally to the football in tackle. Only 2 forced broken tackles on the day for Jonah and Damon. That's not good enough. That is not good enough. You have to. Those guys are far too talented to have only 2 forced broken tackles, because you think about the flip side with Jordan Marshall, Michigan's running back, running through guys, running around guys, consistently falling forward. That ends up being 2 or 3 yards a carry. That adds up to a lot throughout the game. None of that for Washington. So Michigan was really disciplined schematically. They forced Damon to hand the ball off to Jonah. So then there's just few opportunities. And I think about the one time where it was a designed quarterback run where Decker DeGraff was gonna pull around and block. Michigan had the perfect run blitz right into that, and they executed it flawlessly. And then again, Ernest Hausman made a big time tackle in space on Damon Williams. I mean, it's one-on-one, and you would love that if you're Washington. I got my quarterback on a linebacker, but Michigan's linebacker won. So it starts with the scheme. Wink Martindale, just like Chip Lindsey, called probably his best game of the year, had his players completely dialed in, and then the players executed when given the opportunities to tackle. I mean, Illinois, it's a completely different defensive scheme than Michigan, but that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to come into this game plan saying, let's force Damon to hand the ball off to Jonah, and then let's see if Jonah can beat us.
So I love where you're going with that because I think that's one thing where Washington hasn't gotten more than 70 yards on the ground for Jonah Coleman in any game since UC Davis in week 2. And it's very clear that there's been a lot of where they talked about it last week against Rutgers, some players and coaches. And it's certainly been a theme for the last couple of weeks that opposing game plans have been just collapse on Jonah Coleman and let's see what happens from there. And Michigan, obviously, you talk about that play by Ernest Hausman. That was a tremendous play.
Yeah.
Had the athletes to make plays and stick with Demond on the outside. I don't think Illinois has that same caliber of defense. And I look at just where they are in terms of in the Big Ten right now. They rank 10th in rushing defense at 131 yards per game. And this is one of those games where we even saw, you mentioned Washington didn't have a run longer than 8 yards in this game. We saw Jonah rip off a 34 yard run against Ohio State. It's very clear that, especially when this offensive line is healthy, and that's a big thing that I'm looking at for this week where Jedd Fisch sounds really optimistic about getting Carver Willis back. I think the jury's still out on John Mills, but adding another guy like that back to the fold would be a huge benefit as well. Is there's still a lot of room to operate on the ground, especially when those guys are in the lineup for Washington. And I think that we're going to see a lot more of that this week. And I think there's still certainly questions that people have about just kind of what this plan of attack might look like against Illinois, but there's just a lot more room to take advantage, in my opinion.
So give me that again. I just was writing that down. You Carver Willis, you expect to be back against Illinois.
That's what it sounds like from just some of the comments that Jedd Fisch made post game, and then it sounds like John Mills is also out of the walking boot. Yeah,
but maybe not. That doesn't sound like that one's trending, right?
I'm 50-50 on that one right now.
Okay. Well, regardless, though, I mean that's a huge piece of this because again, like Washington they're building their offensive line, and I think Coach Switzer has done a great job, like in terms of technical development in the trenches. But there's just not the depth. So when you lose key pieces, there's a huge drop off. And now you're facing a Michigan defense that is healthy in the front and dominant and playing pissed off. Again, it's just like a really bad matchup. But now you're playing Illinois, and they got some good players. Don't get me wrong. They got some Gabe Akis is a big-time threat as a pass rusher. They got good players, but they don't have the players to the caliber of Michigan. So this should be a game where it's like, hey, we're going to get some of our offensive line back healthy. We're also playing against I don't want to call them a lesser opponent. It's just not the same. So this is where some of that gap should be closed, and you'd expect Jonah to have a breakout game. And again, I go back to, I think this team is going to play pissed off, just like you saw Michigan play pissed off against the Huskies. The Huskies are going to play pissed off against the Illini, understanding like, okay, we have no room for error going forward. We got to go out there and ball out.
So I love where you're going with that because when I look at the matchup between Washington's pass game and this Illinois secondary, I know they're down Xavier Scott, their best defender on the back end. Illinois is 15th in the conference right now, allowing 240 yards per game. This is something where I don't think we've seen Washington's passing offense struggle like this. Like really, even in the Ohio State game, there were a couple of moments of, okay, yeah, this is really nice. That's really nice. Where early on, there's the big shot down the field to Denzel that he pulls in. But from that point on, It didn't feel like Washington could get much going because you got a pair of chunk plays on one to Desmond Roebuck and then one to Denzel Boston right before the second interception. But there just weren't a lot of opportunities that DeMond had to sit in the pocket and just deliver the ball downfield. And this feels like a game where I go back and I look at what Indiana did against Illinois. I don't know if Jedd Fisch is going to come in with any kind of game plan like that with what we've seen from Kurt Cignetti. But I think that Washington has the receivers on the outside to really find ways to unlock it. One guy who I was really happy with from this game against Michigan coming away from it, and it's taken this long to talk about it because there were so many negatives, was Raiden Vinesprae. And having a receiver develop like that alongside Denzel Boston and alongside what we've seen from Desmond Roebuck already, it just gives me a lot of hope in what Washington's pass game can be in the back half of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I was again just taking some notes as you were going there, and one thing I wrote a note down when I was watching the tape, and I felt like Ohio State did an excellent job of this. Michigan did an excellent job. I mean, maybe even better, but it's the defensive line and linebacker rush lane discipline. Like this is what the game plan is going to be. It's easy to talk about, harder to execute. But what Michigan did is, have you ever heard of like, don't get above the quarterback? Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so for the viewers at home, basically, like when Demond is dropping back and say his setup point, say he takes a 5-step drop from shotgun, he's setting up with his first hitch about 8 or 9 yards past the original line of scrimmage. So what Michigan is telling their defensive linemen, in particular their defensive ends, you cannot get upfield. You cannot rush to 11 yards or 12 yards. Once you get to the same level as Demond, you stop working vertical and you start working lateral. And everyone has to be selfless, not selfish, because then the pocket will slowly collapse and sacks and pressures become a team stat rather than an individual. And Demond is he's a short quarterback. Okay. It just is what it is. He is a shorter quarterback. It's harder to see and operate from the pocket when you're a guy of his size. I believe he's capable, but that was the game plan for Michigan, and Michigan's secondary has been vulnerable this year. So you would think it seemed like maybe that was the game plan is Jedd wanted to test the secondary, especially with Vines Bright and Denzel Boston and some of the weapons, but it was really the pass rush discipline that made that really difficult. Illinois is going to do the exact same thing. So I wonder there's got to be some adjustments of, hey, maybe you get him on the move. Maybe you do some not full boots, but half boots, or there's ways you could kind of change the picture to help out your offensive line and give Demond clean pictures visually into the secondary. I think that's going to be something to watch this weekend is what does Jedd do to give Demond clean vision where his arm talent can start to really shine through.
I'm glad you mentioned the boots and getting him outside of the pocket, because I feel like that was something we just didn't see a whole lot of in this game. And like we were just talking about, it feels like a lot of that is credit to Michigan. Like I know Derek Moore made a really nice play where Decker DeGraff was blocking him one-on-one in space. And it felt like, and I was talking about this on yesterday's show, that was a play that was designed to have Quentin Moore in the game before he obviously goes out early in the game. Sounds like he's okay, which is really nice news for Washington.
Even then, though, you can't do that, in my opinion.
That's
can't.
Fair.
You even if it's Quentin, it doesn't. Derek Moore is a second round pick.
I think that's fair.
That's a bad matchup. Period. Now you could probably no, you can't get away. That Gabe Akis is a day 2 pick this weekend. Illinois, like you cannot put a tight end on these elite pass rushers in an obvious passing situation. So that's just almost guaranteed to be a negative or something really bad. So yeah, you're gonna have to make some adjustments there.
So, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because it feels like we just didn't see enough of that, getting Demond out on the move and giving him opportunities, because they like to run slide and different boots and different things like that. And I just feel like we didn't see enough of that. And it didn't feel like Washington ever got an opportunity to get into a rhythm like that. So one more thing, because you mentioned it right off the top, that I think we should break down before we get out of here is Washington has not scored a point in the first quarter since the Washington State game. Like they really struggled to get off to a fast start and put points on the board. Is there anything that you saw that from Washington's offense early in this game that you'd want to see them take advantage of, like you said, with their backs against the wall?
Well, I'm really surprised, because I know I've said this on your shows a number of times. I just think Jedd Fisch is one of the bright offensive minds in all of football. And when you talk about starting slow, like that first quarter, that's scripted. Like that is scripted. The players walk through those 10 or 15 plays. They practice those 10 or 15 plays. Like that's when you should be your most comfortable as an offense and as a team. So it's really shocking to see those statistics. I guess like all I want to see is execution. At the end of the day, this podcast could be 5 minutes long, because you could just come back to that fundamental truth, which is Michigan executed. They executed in all 3 phases outside of their punter. I can't stand their punt game right now, but for Washington, it just comes down to execution. Penalties are another big thing too, is it's not just the penalty it's when the penalty happens that just kills drives and kills momentum. And it happened against Ohio State. It happened against Michigan, and Illinois is a good team to the point where you cannot beat yourself in this game if you want to win.
Jake, it's always tremendous to have you here. Can't wait to hear you on the call this weekend when you are at Husky Stadium for UW Illinois. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers out there for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. If you like what we have to offer, please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. That's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you subscribe, click that little bell so you never miss when we post new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.